So a moment of pain is worth a lifetime of glory. A quote from our historical person from the day class. Hello everybody, my name is it's me, Mr. Flores, and today we're going to be talking about Louis Zamperini for our Italian-American history unit we're on right now, discussing on World War II. So again, the guy we'll be discovering is Louis Zamperini. So let's begin class. So a little bit about his early life and family background that you guys will be quizzed on. And the specific special quiz will be first, he was born in January 26, 1917, and that's an incorrect, but it was Olean, New York, to two Italian immigrants, as you can see in this picture right over here, guys. This is our character, our man, Louis Zamperini. This is his brother Phil, which you will see later, who becomes a big part of his life. And this is his mom and dad and his sister and a younger little brother. So, obviously, he was raised in Torrance, California. Once his parents and family moved from New York to California because of suffering from a pneumonia at a young age in the cold environment in New York, the doctor told him to move the family to a warmer climate, which is why they came to California. But because we're talking here in the 1920s, the 1930s, when Louis was growing up in California, in America at this time period, there was a lot of racism, you can say, towards Italians, and specifically Italian Americans. And therefore, because of this, he would be bullied at school because due to the fact that his parents were immigrants. That meant that Louis only spoke mainly Italian and spoke English with a pretty thick accent. Because of that, he was bullied in school, and this led to his path of being a delinquent, constantly getting into trouble, smoking, and even drinking at such a young age as 13. And like as you can see in this picture over here, you can see he was constantly getting caught by the police, being sent to juvie, and just overall a troublemaker kid and a kid going down a wrong path in life. But thankfully, because of his older brother, that he encouraged Louis and motivated Louis to join the school track team in Torrance High School. And because of that, little did Louis know at first he wasn't a big fan of running, but as his brother encouraged him, he got better and better at it, till the point where he became so good that he started competing at like Olympic level, getting crazy records in high school. As you can see right here, he was just 17 years old in high school when he broke the mile time, and he made a world record as having a 4 minutes and 21-second mile. So that's pretty quick. Me as a runner, as myself, as you know, class, who runs, that is pretty fast. And because of this allowed him to give him the opportunity to compete in the Olympics in 1936 in Berlin, Germany. So as we can see in this poster, and of course, if you guys recall, in 1930s when we learned about fascism, it was hosted by Nazi Germany, which is why you see the little swastika over here and this propaganda showing of the Aryan race being the superior ones in athletics. But obviously, that's another topic to discuss. But although Mr. Louis competed in the Olympics, he competed both, I think, if I'm correct, in the 3-mile run, I believe. So that basically is about this track right here. It's about 16 times around this track, over and over and over. And he did that in just, if I'm correct, he ran it in 14 minutes. So those of you who've done cross country know how fast that really is. Me as a cross country runner, as you guys know, I only did about, my fastest was 17. So we can see this is like this is world renowned good. We're talking about, this is like the top level he's running right now. And so because of that, his last lap before finishing, although he didn't win, he did get 8th place, and he competed at just 20 years old in the Olympics. He was able to get a 56 seconds 400-meter lap, which is basically one lap around this whole track. So he ran in just 56 seconds, so a new record for a guy like him, and he got famous, obviously popular because of this. The media was all over talking about him and wanting to interview him, and he even got the chance, well, just to say that he to meet Adolf Hitler. And later on, he explains that in his biography. And obviously, of course, once the Olympics was over, he moved on to high school. He competed for USC, as you can see in this picture down here. Let me move my picture over here. Well, yes, he competed, as you can see, in the track team in USC, again, scoring more records, getting trophies and medals, and that gave him the nickname of the Torrance Tornado. The locals called him that because of how quick he was and light on his feet he was. And the guy never gave up, no matter what. So he had a really good stride. And during this moment, as his life class that we will be looking at, this is the moment in his life where, as we can see, heading towards the late 1930s, 1939, as you guys know, comes around, and that begins Germany's invasion of Poland and the beginning of World War II. So therefore, we see here, this Louis decides to bravely fight for his nation and joins, as we will see in the next slide, World War II. So he takes part in it at first, not as an active soldier. He simply joins the U.S. Army Air Force in 1940, in the September of 1940. So this is about a year before Pearl Harbor. So he was training in a base. They were training him, obviously, how to fly. Specifically, he gets into the position of the bombardier. So as you can see in this picture I have down here, this is basically a B-24 bomber. So that was the plane that Mr. Louis, our man, drove or flew on during the war when he served and before the U.S. entered the war. So as you can see here, if you can tell, they have all these little, tiny little labels of the different positions of soldiers, basically the different places they'd be in the airplane. Everybody had their own function, but specifically regarding our character, he was here, as you can tell, the bombardier. This little position right underneath the pilots was his job. So his job was basically to look inside this little like glass-like lens. It almost looks like a telescope or a microscope, and it points straight downwards towards the ground, and it had like this little, a typical little cross shape when like you see on like a scope of a sniper in like video games and stuff. His job was to basically perfectly time or make that little thing connect to the target they were trying to hit. And the moment it hit, he'd pull this lever on his right, and it released some from under somewhere here. It released tons and tons of pounds of basically grenades and all types of bombs, and obviously bombed either the airport they're trying to bomb, Japanese airports and stuff like that. So because Louis joined the U.S. Air Force, most of the U.S. Air Force at this time were serving here, as you can see, in the Pacific Ocean. So Louis' base was here. So one of the in Oahu, if I'm saying that correctly, in Hawaii. So he mainly did his little practice and training sessions took place all over here. So once, as you know, World War II began. That's when the fighting really started. Pearl Harbor, the U.S. joins the war. Therefore, now Louis and his team and the group of U.S. Air Force or Air Force men flew from here and fought and did missions, bombing missions in the Kiribati Islands and the Cook Islands and the if I'm creating this correctly, Tavulu Island and the Solomon Islands and the Marshall Islands. Because at the time all of these islands were being conquered by the Japanese Empire, the Japanese Imperial Army, who was conquering each and every island because they wanted to create a hemisphere where only Asians for Asians type of thing. They only wanted the Asian continent for Asians, nobody else. And then also specific Asians, such as people like Chinese, were going to be excluded. So they were expanding slowly and slowly towards the United States. And after Pearl Harbor, that's where they joined. So Liu and his group of men served in this region of the world. So they fought in the Pacific Theater, as it came to be called. And as you can see here, there was multiple times in his life class where he could have died. Many near-death experiences, as you can see in this picture right here to my right. This is when Louis and his crew one day were going on a mission. I believe it was right over here in the Tuvalu Islands, when they were hit by anti-aircraft Japanese weapons or guns, and I think if I'm correct here, they say that they got shot with over 600 bullets. As you can see here, many of them penetrated the plane, but thankfully he survived. And the plane was literally also on the brink of collapse, of literally crashing, because as they were landing, they basically lost their brakes. And so the pilot, I will introduce the character in a bit, tries pushing the brakes on the plane, and just, it's not working, but they're hoping for their best, and they slam into the island. Back to Hawaii, they slam into an island, And thankfully, because there was this barrier of rocks, the plane hits the rocks, and yes, it jolts the plane, and some of them get injured. Sadly, costing one of the men in his plane's life. But most of them survive, and thankfully he survived. And this is why this photo, they have a picture of him, holding the putting his hand through the hole of one of the bullets to show you how massive this hole was. And he survived this, so it was a miracle indeed. And during this time, as I will move on to our next slide, this is when the Louis' life basically forever changes, as we will see now in our next slide. Sadly, Louis and his crew, once they arrived, that plane that crashed into the Hawaii island of Oahu, they came back from, their mission from the Tuvalu Island. And sadly, while they were there, his crew was sent to go on this rescue mission to, I believe, off the, hundreds of miles off the coast of Hawaii. Some plane, I guess previously, was flying, a U.S. Air Force plane was there flying, and it crashes, and a couple men were stranded at sea. And so basically, Louis' team gets chosen to go do the rescue mission, and therefore, but because their plane was destroyed, they give them this new plane right here, as you can see in this picture, called the Green Hornet. And this plane, to give you guys a little bit of background info, was known for having a lot of failures in its mechanics. It constantly was breaking down. There was always some kind of electrical issue. So it was a plane with a history of just bad news. And you can tell by the moment they boarded this plane, things were just not going to go right. Well, they had to go, so they got on the plane, flew towards south, as we can see here, from Hawaii, down south, heading towards, back to that, as you can see in the map, back towards this direction, as you can see right here where I'm showing you my cursor, and somewhere around here, not close to the Marshall Islands, but a little bit to the more east of the Marshall Islands and southwest of Hawaii. That is when the plane, as you see here, it was over 850 miles away from the island, so there was nothing but water, as you can see in this photo here. And sadly, there was a mechanical failure. As they were flying the plane, the pilots noticed that, if I'm correct, the left motor, or the left engine or propeller, basically just stops. So it's this thing right here you see on the side with the big, propeller, it just stops. So obviously, little by little, the plane starts losing velocity and slowly starts falling, descending very lightly, and they quickly put all the pressure on the right wing, and then that one immediately gets busted and blows up, and completely now they were practically engineless. No engine, practically no propellers pushing it, the engine's completely shut off. So now the plane was nose diving, and sadly they had to prepare for the crash land. As you can see in this little GIF right here, sadly, yes, the plane crashes into the Pacific Ocean, completely surrounded by water. And sadly, from the crew of 11 men that were on there, the only ones who survived were 3. So as you see here, it's Phil, which is one of the pilots of the plane, a man named Mac, who was the gunner. If we go back here, he was the gunner of the plane, so he was the tail gunner. That was his job, so that was the guy Mac's position. He survived. And of course, our character, the man we're studying, Louis Zampirini, survived, who was the bombardier, he was located about here. But obviously, once the plane was going to crash, he kind of took cover here, right in the middle of this plane, where everybody else gathered. And so, of course, plane crashes, horrible impact, and thankfully, them 3 survive in a little lifeboat, and this is where their journey kind of begins. So practically, they stay stranded at sea for days. No water. As you can see, no water, no food, scorching heat, because the Pacific Ocean, this region, is known for getting really hot. Really hot. So bad sunburns for every one of these men as they're in these boats. Massive storms that they encounter as they're in the Pacific Ocean, as well as sharks always surrounding them, because if I'm correct, the pilot, he got a wound, and he right about here in his head, kind of opened his skull a bit open, and they just put kind of a band-aid. But of course, if you know sharks, they're what do you call it, olfactory senses, meaning their nose. It's really sharp. I mean, they can smell from far away, and so blood attracts them, and of course, and then constantly, day and night, they're circling and surrounding their lifeboat non-stop. And obviously, the men every now and then had to use the paddle to fight them off. I mean, scary stuff. And then every now and then they would think, well, maybe someone's here to save us. Like a plane will come, flying above them. They'll shoot, the flare. But sadly, it wasn't their allies, it was the enemy. So there were constant Japanese planes flying by that would see them and start shooting straight at them, and quickly they had to jump overboard of the lifeboat and obviously hope and pray that none of those bullets, as they traveled and hit the water, obviously yes, the bullets slowed down, but still there was a good chance of them penetrating every one of them, any one of them three. And thankfully none of them got shot. It was about like twice that a plane, or a couple, I think twice that a plane tried shooting at their little lifeboat, and yes, they popped the lifeboat, but thankfully they were all safe. So I mean, a miracle. And sadly, because of the amount of days they were surviving, in about the 30th day at sea, the man Mac, because of, yes, he couldn't take it anymore, and sadly, yes, he dies of, most likely to think of heat exhaustion or stroke or something like that. But sadly, he doesn't make it. So therefore, Louis and his fellow pilot, Phil, are the ones who kind of endure the rest of the journey at sea, which is, as you can see here, is over 47 days. So in total, they last 47 days stranded in the ocean, surviving literally on like the albatrosses that were able to capture. I believe they ate a seagull once, but that didn't go well. They threw it up. Then it tasted awful. And sadly, but the day they get rescued on the 47th day is not again an American ship. It's sadly a Japanese Navy ship. So therefore, their journey just went from worse to a lot worse. So as you can see in this picture here, underneath is pretty, I warn you, it's pretty graphic. And yes, they're taken to this island. If I go back here, this island, it was here in the Marshall Islands. If I'm correct, it was called Kwajalein Island. Well, that's what its name, if I'm not pronouncing that, I'm completely not pronouncing that correctly, but it was known as Execution Island because it was known for whoever soldier went there never got out or never left that island alive, because most of them were beheaded. And yes, it was a gruesome end. So that island was known, this little island in the Marshall Islands, one of these little ones here, was known to execute any allies that the Japanese encountered. So of course they capture both of them, interrogate them of course, and make them strip naked, give them showers with like awfully cold water of course, and it's raining. You can't see, but this is a clip from the movie. They made a movie on Louis Zamperini's life. And offer obviously freezing cold temperatures, and they make them completely strip, and it's humiliating style. So that was another thing they dealt with now, was humiliation, extreme humiliation, to the point of wanting to break them mentally, spiritually, emotionally, every area of the body, and physically as well. So they do interrogate them, and they stay there for a couple days. They beat them, they have them in, I believe it's in isolation, literally like in solitary confinement, like, what is it, like 2 feet little shacks that have absolutely no AC. They're fed rice with maggots on it, so as you can tell, they treat them like animals. They constantly take them out and interrogate them, and when they refuse to give them the information, information in regards to their bases, how many men are in, the Hawaiian bases, where are the weak spots, and of course, since they denied, as they were faithful and and they were faithful to their country, they were beaten constantly. So they endured that for many, many days, until finally they were transferred now to a prisoner of war camp known as POW camps, which is, again, this is where sadly both of our characters get separated. The guy Phil goes to he goes to a different prisoner of war camp, and Louis goes to, as we will see here, the camp known as the Funa camp, located now in mainland Japan. So they go from this little island in Marshall Islands, they put him in a ship, blindfolded, and ship them to mainland Japan, and he gets taken to Afuna, our character Louis Zamperini. So he's taken there in July 1933. As we can see, he's a POW until the end of the war. So he lasts for over 2 years. about 2 years as a prisoner of war in the most horrendous environments. So as we can see in these pictures right here, some are a little graphic too, Louis is constantly beaten, tortured as you will see here, and starved. So to give you a little background information, there was this general or this prison guard who's kind of like the head prison guard of every of the camps he was in, Alfuna camp, Amori, and Naoetsu. And when he first encounters him, there was something this guy had about him. Again, as you guys remember in our discussion previously about Japanese what is it Japanese militarism, sorry, forgot them. Japanese militarism, we see that in their culture. They're known to be, you don't surrender, you never become a prisoner of war, and if you do, you are ordered to take your life. So for a Japanese man to see an American or Australian, a Frenchman, an Englishman to surrender was a sign of disgrace. Like they don't deserve any respect practically, because in their beliefs they taught him at a young age that you never surrender, and if you do, you're a disgrace, and it's better that you were dead. So that is why this specific general will constantly torment, no one till this day knows why, but constantly targeted Louis Zamperini, and constantly, as we can see in this photo, will play mind games, as you can see in this photo here. Louis recalls that he would tell him to don't look at me, and then Louis wouldn't look at him, and he'd hit him in the head with, you can see this bamboo stick, making him bleed right here in his temple. Then he'll make him get up and say, okay, now look at me, and he will look at him, and again he'd hit him with the bamboo stick. So of course Louis was completely gotten disoriented. Okay, do I look at you or don't? And again he says it the third time, don't look at me, and finally Louis just doesn't look away, and he leaves him alone. But after leaving him with a bloody nose, a bloody ear, and a bloody here at the temple too, awfully causing horrible headaches from most of the time as he is a prisoner of war. And so again, he's constantly tortured, not fed, as we can see here in this other photo down here. Let me move my camera. Louis is, because after denying to work for the Japanese and send propaganda messages through the radio, and in return for doing that, they were going to completely free him from the POW camp. He was able to live in Tokyo, Japan, and not only that, but get good food, get fed, able to live a normal life, even get maybe perhaps married, live in a nice place. But of course, like I said, in return, he had to forsake his country, so betray them. And he describes that many Americans did so because they didn't want to go through this. But Louis, of course, was a patriot and decided to stay faithful to his country, and because of that, they sent him back to the Funa camp, and that is where he is ordered or asked to stand, as we can see here. And the general tells him practically, or the prison guard chief basically tells every single member of this prison camp to punch him in the face, and if they refuse to, they brought out, sadly, a scapegoat, so another fellow soldier, and they beat him with his bamboo stick. So it was either that guy would get beaten or he'd get hit. And of course, Louis, being the brave and courageous man he is, told each one of these men, no, hit me, I prefer you guys hitting me over that man. So and we're talking people here, like hundreds of men in this prison camp. So he got punched in the face, and not just a little, a light hit. We're talking real hard, because he noticed if they didn't punch hard, he hit the other soldier on the ground who was already tortured, who they brought out. He would hit him with his bamboo stick even more and scream at these guys, saying, no, hit him harder. And until they hit him hard enough, then okay, go, next person. So it was almost like this game. Of course, extreme torture, extreme abuse, and obviously bloody to the max. He was left then, once every single person hit him in the face, punishing him for being patriotic and loyal to his country, he was left out in the cold basically to sleep here in the night for a whole night. And he remembers that he completely blacked out. He doesn't remember what happened. He remembers waking up the next day and he's in his bed. So that's how hard he hit him. And perhaps he got a concussion, didn't even remember. And again, so as the war obviously progresses, this general, thankfully, he gets transferred to this other camp, and Louis as well gets transferred to this other new camp called Mori. And in there, yes, it's still bad. It's not a good camp still, but for him, he's still relief because of the fact that our villain of the story, Mr. The Bird Watanabe, that was his name, the prison guard. He, because he's not there, he doesn't get as abused, doesn't get tortured as much anymore. Yes, he's starved and, lack of food and dehydration, not and lacking water. They wouldn't give him much water, but he knew, okay, I wasn't getting tortured. But because of the war, obviously, we're talking by this point, it was already 1940, I think late 1944, like December. One day the Allies bombed that camp. Many parts, many little buildings and sections of the camp get burned. And of course, the Japanese guards, their prison guards, forced the Allied prisoners of war, soldiers, to basically put out the fires themselves. And they notice, well, this camp's not really livable. Now we have to transfer you all. And Louis again gets pretty great. Now where are we gonna transfer us? And so they ship them all in a train. They travel far, far away. And we're talking now they go south. I believe they go south, the southern part of Japan. I guess that region is pretty cold. Now they go to Noetsu camp. And again, they line up, and they're about to greet the prison guard chief. Is about to come out from his office, and that's when Louis notices again, coincidentally, he gets taken to the same camp that the Bird gets sent to, or promoted now, because now he was a general, but he was just in charge of that camp. So again, he goes through hell again, practically the whole cycle again. He gets tortured, starved, beaten by the Bird constantly, by the prison guard. That was his nickname because of how, I believe they called him the Bird because of how he'd watch everything like a bird. He was like flying above them, seeing on, knowing on. Anybody did anything, he'd go out after them and torture and beat the heck out of them to the point of death, almost death. And even to some of these men experienced death. Thankfully, Louis didn't. And then towards our end of our story, towards the end of, now we're heading 1945, the Allies are slowly gaining the territory of each, doing their campaign known as island hopping, conquering island by island and defeating the Japanese in like the Marshall Islands and then the Solomon Islands, the Samoan Islands, Tuvalu Island, the little tiny atolls around there, and slowly inching their way forward towards Japan. So as the war was coming to an end in the Pacific, by this point the war in Europe was over, that's when the Bird starts acting even more erratic. He constantly would just wake up in the middle of the night and go towards Louis' bunk and just start beating him for no reason with his bell. The belt buckle, actually, here in his ear, and he said he hit him so hard that he became deaf from one ear because of that, for the rest of his life. And so one day, apparently Louis, of course, once he goes to the Noetsu camp, they were forced there to, pick coal. So their job was to carry this coal in little baskets, dump them on top of the Japanese trains, and those Japanese trains would ship them to where the coal was needed. And one day, Louis, obviously, day after day of being starved, his body couldn't take it anymore. And so one day, as he's carrying this basket of coal on his back, one of the soldiers, out of evilness, pushes him off like this kind of ramp he was on going down, and he falls really hard, and he lands on his ankle, and he breaks his ankle. And obviously, of course, excruciating pain. They force him to get up. He's trying to work, and again, the Bird comes in, sees him, and sees it as him struggling and working really slow. He grabs him by his hair, throws him in the ground, and throws this humongous, doesn't throw, but, and then orders him to pick up this humongous beam. We're talking about like a 200-pound beam of wood. And he tells him, hold this beam like this, as you can see in this photo, guys, over your head. And then he orders the other prison guards, he tells them that basically the moment he drops this beam, kill him. So of course, extreme torture, inhumane. Who would do such a thing? And so Louis knew this is it. Like, I'm gonna die here. And thankfully, Louis had still some of that strength in him. As a runner, you learn to build endurance, and I think that's what helps him in a sense. He carries this beam over his head for over like hours. He said hours he spent there the whole day, and it's hot. And then as it gets closer to night, it starts getting really cold. And the Bird, for every second he continued holding that, Louis could hold the beam of wood above his head, the Bird got even more angrier and angrier and angrier, to the point that Louis lifts it up so high that he starts yelling in an act of defiance, saying, you're not gonna break me, which is why this movie, or he's known as being called Unbroken. They make a movie called Unbroken because of his character. He never broke in the war. No matter what happened to him, he kept on fighting. He survived. He crashed in the plane. He survived. He was, fighting in air, and he didn't get shot. His plane, yeah, he got a lot of damage on it, but he survived it, and then he becomes a POW, and he still survives. And again, so he's lifting that beam, screaming. Of course, the bird tells him, "Don't look at me," and Louis, this time, he's fed up. He stares him in the eyes. So the bird gets angry. He runs towards him with his bamboo stick and smacks him right here in the head. Louis just collapses on the ground. The bird just keeps on hitting him and hitting him with all his, strength with that bamboo stick, constantly back and forth, not stopping, until he finally lets go of the stick and just, pounds and pounds him. And then as Louis is laying there, taking every one of those hits, and finally the bird gets tired, notices that everybody in the camp completely stopped working because they're seeing, this scene unfold. And he orders them, in angry mode, "Get back to work," type of thing. And of course, they leave Louis there in the ground for like the whole day. And little does Louis know, I think days later, after this incident, actually, like 2 or 3 days later, the bird one day just stops appearing. The next following day, he doesn't show up in the morning. Usually in the morning, they do a roll call, and he comes out, and they all have to salute him. Doesn't come out. And so, of course, Louis is like, "What the heck? What's going on?" And then there's these tiny little pamphlets that are dropped at their camp, and they're all confused, like, what's going on? And the little pamphlets, if I'm correct, they're like in another language. So at first they thought, "Oh shoot, maybe this is the Japanese saying they're gonna kill us." And then coincidentally, as Louis notices the bird's not there, the leftover prison guards in the Noetsu prison of war camp, or POW camp, basically order every single soldier and allies, every single POW, to head towards the showers. So they're all walking towards this place where they usually shower. It's like one of these famous lakes in Japan, a river in Japan, and they all would bathe there every morning, or about every morning. So they take them all there, but usually they go in small groups. So now that they were being ordered to all go there, every single one of these allied soldiers basically thought, "Well, this is it. We're gonna die." They're all accepting the face. Some men crying. Louis was just tired, thinking, "Let's just get this over with. I've gone for too much. This is too much. I can't take it anymore." He was at the end of his life, and at the moment when they thought they were gonna get killed or murdered and just shot horrifically, is when a U.S. plane just flies right above head, and they notice and they see the symbol of the little star on the wing of the plane. They know immediately, yeah, this is the United States. Everybody just starts cheering, yelling, "The war is over! The war is over!" And Louis just, that relief of, finally this is over. And people, just hug him. They drop packs of food, and basically they ship everyone back home. And likely, yes, Louis returns back home finally in September 1945. That is when, the Japanese signed the treaty of ending the war in the Pacific Theater, and officially surrendering. And as we can see, Louis survives basically, although he goes, as we will see in the next slide, he goes home with many burdens he has to carry. So the war ends for Louis physically, but as we will see now, the war doesn't end in his mind. Two very different things. Of course, as a soldier, yes, he's released, but because of all the stuff he went through, the torture, this causes Louis to get extreme cases of PTSD, constantly getting night sweats. He hears the pop of a tire in the distance, and his mind goes back to, World War II, in the plane when in his bombardier position, when they were flying above, shooting at the enemy Japanese little planes, flying right past by them, bullets flying, and people maybe look at him like, "What the heck was wrong with this guy? This guy's crazy." He just do this in public. Or when he was at home and he'd just hide, when he hear a gunshot in the distance or a loud bang, it just trigger him and take him back to the war. And constantly he'd sleep at night and have horrific dreams of, nightmares of the bird, the prison guard that would constantly torture him, and he couldn't sleep. Eventually, yes, he gets married actually, but that marriage just goes south. Constantly, he's, you know, not spending time with family. He turns to alcohol and becomes an alcoholic eventually, to kind of drown out those feelings, trying to escape that reality in his mind of mental torture. And he's almost on the brink of divorce because his wife's just fed up. She can't handle it anymore. So as we can see, this is another topic of our historical topic as we've discussed in World War II, where soldiers, this idea of PTSD was still kind of new. People were kind of used, they already knew about it because of World War One, but it was still kind of hard to treat it. So many of men, again, not just Louis Zamperini, but he represented the life of many men who, although endured, as you can see, all these horrific things we discussed, when they came back home, it wasn't freedom yet. It was now the battle of the mind. So as you guys learn, PTSD, of course, that's going to be on your quiz. Many of these little facts. But of course, as you know, it was just mental torture, horrific torture. And sadly, one day, his wife and him are asleep, and he thinks his wife is his enemy, and he thinks he's dreaming, but in reality, he's actually choking his wife, not choking the bird in his dream. In his dream, he was dreaming that he was choking the bird. In reality, he was doing it to his wife. So it was like the last straw. She leaves. And one day, she invites him to, as we can see down here, one of these revival tents of Billy Graham. One day, Louis goes, and eventually feels at peace. All that torture leaves his mind, and he converts to Christianity again. As you guys learn, we will learn continue learning from here on out. Constantly, men turn to church, religion, and faith to heal themselves from this PTSD, of course. And because now he was a Christian, of course, he basically goes back to the prisoner of war camp that he was captured, which was, if I'm correct, if we go back, it was the Omori camp. He goes to that one, he goes to the Funa and to the Noetsu camp. And as you can see here, this is a quote by him: "To forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover that the prisoner was you." So, very wise words. He was actually a prisoner. He hated these men. In reality, he became a prisoner of hate. Again, maybe this is not really, we're going maybe a little off topic, but he does forgive his captors, so it's something to be definitely admired about such a great act. And again, after this, eventually he forgives his captors. A great achievement, great accomplishment. Not many do that. He decides to build a juvenile boys camp. So now, basically teaching boys who were like him to do things like fishing, rafting, hiking, and doing all types of sports. Encouraging these boys that yes, you guys are troublemakers, but you see all these different things you accomplish. Shows that yes, you can do anything you put your mind to. So of course, this is very motivational. Very motivational for everyone, for each of these boys, and impact every one of their lives. So again, he gave back to his community greatly. So great. Of course, Louis was a great hero to the people not of California, but to America in general. He gave everything for this country. So of course, guys, this is towards the end of our session, and you'll get light questions here and there from this school slide. But of course, we saw Mr. Louis Zamperini, and we want to commemorate him. Of course, was born in 1917 and just passed away not so long ago, about 12 years ago. Went from being a troublemaker little boy to becoming a track star, to joining the war, and then being a veteran, an American hero, World War II hero, an Olympic Hall of Famer. He fixed his relation with his family. A man that definitely many of us can learn a lot from. And his life shows a lot of history. His young youth shows us his history of the racism towards the Americans, and Italians in general during this time. We see the track star, kind of that history of, track, and the proof when he runs, in the 1936 Olympics. Again, we discussed this topic of Hitler wanting to prove that, the Aryan race was the most superior race. Well, we see in this case, Louis in that same 1936 Olympics, Jesse Owens competes and disproves that theory wrong. So we see a little bit of that history taking place in that part of his life, of course. We see World War II in his eyes, looking at one case study, which is him. fighting in the Pacific theater, specifically in that region, the Marshall Islands, the Tuvalu Islands, the Solomon Islands. That was kind of his territory where he did his war campaigns. And of course, we see his POW. So again, we see that history of what was it like to be a POW camp as an Allied troop in the Japanese POW camps during World War II. So of course, it was horrific. And he wasn't just the only one. This story, he's one man of many stories that are worth noting and worth discussing and lecturing on. I just chose him because, as we can see, he has a fascinating story, and like many of us could relate with many parts of the aspects of his life. And of course, now a man who gave many to his community. So thank you, class, for listening to this lesson. And class, I hope we see you in class very soon. But I appreciate your time, everybody. Have a nice day, and we'll see you until next time. Bye, everybody.